Okay, we are live. I am with Tracy from Keto and Crimes channel, where she talks about true crime, dark history, and sometimes keto and nutrition. Do you still talk about keto or?
On occasion, I don't do it as I'm not a keto or obviously not a fitness or I just kind of document the weight loss journey I've been on. Was almost 400 pounds. I'm down now to right at 250 now. Still got a long way to go. But I will talk about my progress on occasion. But I'm not a weight loss channel.
That's interesting. Can you talk a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in true crime?
Yeah, absolutely. Always been well. My name's Tracy. I do run Keto and Crime. Stand up committee. Well, I'm self-employed. I work from home. I have clients that I do various tech and admin project management projects for. But I've always been interested in true crime. I'm still a stand-up comedian. Before COVID, I was touring extensively across the U.S. and so I started my YouTube channel as just a basis for my comedy, but then I've always been interested in morbid things, true crime, dark history, and I did one true crime video on a crime that haunted me from the time I was a kid because it was one that happened close to home, and that was the Judith Ann Neely murders. And I did one video on that one time, and it blew up, much more than any of my other videos. And from there, I'm like, I really enjoyed that. Being a comedian, I was a storyteller anyway, so I just kind of pivoted the channel and went that way.
You have
And
a really nice, relaxed style in the way that you tell true crime stories and are really pleasurable to listen to. I would encourage everybody to go and subscribe to your
I
channel.
I
Why do
try
you
to.
need?
Oh
I'm
no, I
sorry.
was about. I try to talk to people like as if you were in the room with me having a cup of coffee. I try to talk to you like you're there. That's how I style my channel, which is why it's so casual.
You're
It
very
is. And
homey. You're very homey. What's the story with the tree? So you changed the tree
hmm
behind you
hmm
seasonally. So you like decorate it for like say Valentine's Day,
hmm
Halloween. What are the holidays you decorate your tree behind
Uh,
you?
all of them. It was a Halloween tree. It went from Halloween right into Christmas. Now it's winter tree. I mean, I guess technically still looks like Christmas, but it's snowmen, icicles. So it's just winter. Then it'll be Valentine's Day, and then it'll be St. Patrick's Day, and then it'll go on in summer. It's patriotic the whole summer because of Labor Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July. So it'll have flags, and it'll go back into Halloween.
Nice. So why are we talking about John Wayne Gacy? What made
Oh,
him famous?
John Wayne Gacy is part of what I call the trifecta of American serial killers. That's John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and I would say, some people say, Ramirez, but I say Ted Bundy is the third one that everybody knows and talks about. So he's just up there, and he's also a killer clown.
Hmm.
Stephen King loosely based Pennywise on him. So it was just kind of he's just one of the big ones that you know.
Right. And he was constantly doing interviews and out
Mm.
there in the press and just it just seemed to never really die as far as the story and the fascination with him. Where was he born?
He was born in Chicagoland. It's kind of whether he was born in Chicago proper or one of the many little areas that make it. So I just say he was born in Chicagoland, Illinois. There's conflicting reports as to where he was actually born, but he came from a blue collar family. His father was a World War I veteran, worked as a auto mechanic, rebuilt cars, and his mom was a housewife. And his mom, who he was very close to up until her death, um, was a homemaker. So he had two sisters, and his sisters loved him to the day they died. I mean, they could not believe he did what he did. They did many interviews with him, and they supported him and believed in his innocence right up until the last part. I don't, whether or not they ever accepted the fact that he was a killer, I don't know. But he was very close to his mom and his sisters.
That's interesting because the interviews I saw one interview with Oprah with his sister,
Mm-hmm.
and she claimed that he admitted to her that right after his arrest that he had done some of the murders. And she's like, well, if you've done some, you had to do all. So is that a shift in story with
I'm
you
sure it
coming out
is.
there?
I don't know, if that was a later interview, whether it was early 1980s Oprah or, later 2000s Oprah, but everything that I had read up until the time he was, arrested and convicted, they were behind him, and that's fine. That's their brother. I get that. I don't hold anybody, I'm not going to down anybody for believing in their loved one.
Well, you can believe in them, but I
Yeah.
don't know. I think you go
Yeah.
into a different level when you start doing an innocence campaign for them
Yeah.
when there's that many bodies found in their home. But
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was his childhood like?
Horrible. If you can, his father was an alcoholic, abusive alcoholic, abusive to everyone in the family, particularly John, because John, being raised with, his father was away a lot. So being raised with a mother and sisters, he tended to enjoy the same things that his mom and sisters did. And he was very much a cook and a seamstress, and enjoyed playing dolls with his sister and sisters, and just one of the girls, for lack of a better term. Not saying that he was not an effeminate man at all, but he just enjoyed what would be construed as feminine things, and his father hated that. His father hated that about him and beat him and called him a queer and an F word and everything that you could possibly, just mercilessly beat him, trying to make a man out of him.
And do you think that that had to do with some of his issues? I mean, that's been brought up, this kind of conflict with his homosexuality and need to prove himself, or maybe anger around his homosexuality. Do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, I believe, I would fully say that I believe, unlike Dahmer, who I think was born to kill,
Mhm.
I don't think Dahmer could have been stopped. I think if Gacy had had a better childhood, that maybe he wouldn't have gone the way that he did, because I really believe that. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't have tendencies, but I don't think it was in deeply ingrained as Dahmer.
Mhm. Because Dahmer's childhood, from I've just read that book. It's a graphic novel, My Friend Dahmer. I think they made a
Mm-hmm.
movie out of it that I haven't seen.
Mm-hmm.
But he was saying that Dahmer's home life wasn't great, that he was coming to school drunk. So, but you think the problem started with Dahmer even before that?
Yeah,
Before, yeah.
Dahmer had an obsession with death. He From his earliest days, he was, bringing home roadkill, dissecting roadkill, was even have noted to have killed small animals, just obsessed with death and decomposition. And then his dad, was a chemist, or worked in a biological chemical field, and would like feed this interest because it was something they enjoyed together, science. Not as morbid as Dahmer liked to put it, but his father and them would dissect animals and look at them and stuff like that. And he had an early obsession with that sort of thing, and the fact he was already killing small animals. Gacy, there was never any reports of Gacy doing that as a child. So,
Mhm.
Gacy would probably knitted you mittens, but he wouldn't have, he wouldn't have killed a cat.
So when you say he's a killer clown, he actually was a clown that had to. But before that ever happened, before, we always think of him as the suburban Chicago killer where all these bodies were found.
Mm-hmm.
He's been, from what I read, he's the serial killer who was tried for the most murders,
Mm-hmm.
33,
Mm-hmm.
and some of those men, all young men or teenagers, and
Mm-hmm.
some of them still haven't been identified. So, but even before he really settled down in Chicago, what was his young adulthood like?
He spent his entire he never graduated high school, but he spent his entire young adult life trying to please his father. That was obvious. He would try to help his father, on projects. And there was the worst beating he said he ever got was when his father was rebuilding an engine and had everything like laid out the way it should be, the parts and the tools. And he accidentally messed up his little diagram, so to speak. And he said he beat him within an inch of his life. So he spent his entire young adulthood trying to please his father. And eventually he couldn't take it anymore, and he took off to Vegas. And in Vegas, he got a job. Well, his father did buy him a car, supposedly. His father made the down payment on a car and made Gacy, and kept it in his name, but made Gacy made John make the payments on it. And whenever he got mad at John, he would either take the keys or take the distributor cap off of it so John couldn't use it. And finally, John got so fed up with it, he just left home. He took off to Vegas, got a job as an I'm hesitant to say paramedic, but he drove an ambulance and was an ambulance attendant, and then eventually worked as an attendant in a mortuary. And that's where he took an interest in embalming and learned how to embalm and stuff like that. And he actually confessed that he had an episode where a young boy was brought in after a traffic accident, and he was doing things to the body. Where I think that is where he had his first homosexual experience in high school, he said. But, this was the first time he leaned into the macabre, and it disturbed him so much that he basically called his mom and asked her to beg his father to let him come home. And he went back to Chicago at that point.
Interesting. And how did he meet his first wife?
In college,
Marilyn Myers.
Met him at his first career. He was a manager. I want to say Nunn Hanley Shoes. Mm-hmm. He was in their management training program. He met her there. She was from Iowa. Her father was a businessman that was buying up Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. And that's how he met her. They hit it off. He often said that his time with her, when they had their kid, when they had their house and their kids in Iowa, was the best time of his life. And but then other things happened. But that's how he met her. Her name was Marilyn Myers, or Meyer. And they had 2 children together. And he never saw those children again after his first arrest.
Mm-hmm. What are the circumstances of Gacy's first arrest in first arrest and conviction, which he got convicted of in 1968?
Yeah, it was. He was a member of the JCs.
What are the JCs?
It's a civic service fraternal organization. They do all kinds of fundraisers. They're a lot like the Lions Club, Kiwanis. They're community help groups, usually a men only. And they're just a way for people. And then it's a social network. It's, you do good in the community, but you also meet a lot of people. And he started working for the Democratic Party of Illinois as a teenager and joined the JCs. He was voted most outstanding JC in both Illinois and Iowa during his tenure with the JCs. And he was a block captain for the Democratic Party, really into grassroots politics. So I think that's why he joined the JCs, because that was more of his, more networking. But evidently the Waterloo, Iowa JCs was a front for a lot of bad things. They watched stag films, they drank, there was orgies, they were all swingers, evidently. I'm not sure what was going on in Iowa, but that's what was going on at JC organization.
Right, big place, right? Yeah.
But he got into that, and he ended up essentially having a long-term relationship of some sort with a young man with the last name Voorhees, who was actually the son of a prominent Republican state representative in Iowa, and who was also vying for president of the JCs against Gacy. So he always contended that he was set up, that this was a lie. But anyway, he was convicted of sodomy of young Mr. Voorhees and sentenced to 10 years in state prison in Iowa.
And and how much time did he do, and what was his experience like in prison?
He did 18 months of a 10-year sentence, which to me just blows my mind. But while he was in prison in Iowa, he was well liked by inmates and the officials as well. He started a prison chapter of the JCs, which is just weird. He grew from 50 to 650 men during the time he was there. He was a cook in the cafeteria. He did kind of a unionized effort to get raises for everybody in prison, and actually got their wages raised, and was a head cook in the cafeteria, was well liked, had I guess if you could call it a pleasant experience. His first experience in prison was kind of pleasant, and then he ended up being paroled out after 18 months. He was told that he would have to move back to Chicago and live with his mother. He could not be out after 10 p.m. But he was only on probation after parole for a year. Like
Interesting.
1970 to 1971. He was on not house arrest because he got a job as a short order cook and was still doing shenanigans around that. But he moved in with his mom and worked as a short order cook until the terms of his probation was up.
How did he meet his second wife, Carol Hoff?
They had known each other in high school, and they just kind of reacquainted, and he had already started his contracting company. He was working as a cook during the day and working on contracting positions in the afternoon and the weekend, and was actually growing his business to what would now be $1 million a year revenue company. But back then he was making about $100,000 a year in revenue doing contracting jobs.
And that's a pattern you'll see with Gacy. Like wherever he goes, he makes money.
Yeah,
he died with $1.5 million dollar estate. So
yeah,
we'll talk about that a little later. But
and that's what happened. That's why he was in Iowa. He was regional manager for his father-in-law's, 3 of his father-in-law's KFC franchises, and that's how he would do a lot of the get a lot of the kids that he was messing with, for lack of a better term, the employees, fast food employees. He would fraternize with them, and he only got caught for one, and that was Voorhees.
Wow. So what were Gacy's connections to the Democratic Party?
He was a highly placed grassroots fundraising kind of person called a block captain. And so, the people that are on the streets campaigning, going door to door, doing the telephone, the telephone banks, the telephone circles. He even met Rosalind Carter. He campaigned very heavily for Democratic candidates during the 60s and 70s. And he was well known and well respected in the Chicago Democratic circles. And actually kind of a party host. When he bought the Norwich, Illinois ranch house, the one that would go down in infamy, he was known to host summer parties there that would attract up to 400 people. A lot of them high-placed Democratic politicians, business owners. He would go shopping for his elderly neighbors. He would fix things around their houses. I mean, if you didn't know what John Gacy was and you lived next door to him, you'd probably think he was a pretty swell guy.
Who was Gacy's first victim in 1972, and what was different about that crime?
Excuse me. Well, if you mean his first kill or his first kill.
Timothy McCoy, I'm talking about.
Yeah, Timothy McCoy now he had different tactics in how he met people. Lots of them were his employees. I believe McCoy was an employee of his that he met, and he strangled him. He was also working for. He had also joined the volunteer organization that did the clown stuff, and he supposedly dressed as a clown during the first kill and handcuffed him, told him it was part of the magic show, and eventually strangled him to death. But he would lure young boys. It was always young boys home. And then just like Dahmer, he would either stab or strangle them.
Because I read the first one was stabbed. I read he was stabbed, and that was unusual, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Okay. All this time, Carol, Gacy's wife, is finding wallets of teenage boys in his car.
Yeah.
And how did that go? I mean, how did that confrontation go?
Well, unlike his first wife, who divorced him as soon as, all of his shenanigans in Iowa came out, I can't blame her for that. I would have done the same thing. Carol Hoff, they had a terrible marriage anyway. There was no intimacy. He had already told her he was bisexual and leaned more toward men. So the fact that they would probably never have a sexual relationship probably didn't bear well. But they divorced, but she lived in the house because she didn't have anywhere to go with her two children, with her two girls. And so she just tolerated it. And she saw the boys come and go. I mean, there was no killing, or at least if there was, we don't know about it. And nobody was buried under the house at the time she was there. But she knew what was going on in the garage. Let's just put it that way. And in the car.
So were Gacy's victims not being reported missing, or were they not being investigated?
They weren't being investigated and reported, especially when he got into what is known as his peak period of kills. He kind of switched tactics instead
Which is
of
when?
That would be between 1973 and when he was caught in 1978. Instead of bringing home people that worked for him and doing it that way, he was trolling bars, bus stations, places where male prostitutes were, and bringing them home that way, a lot like Dahmer was. So these were people that didn't have probably many family connections, weren't well known, just kind of, people that I hate to say wouldn't be missed, but that's how he got away with it.
Right. So he really seemed to target people who were, a little vulnerable.
Yeah, definitely. He killed the most vulnerable and the most downtrodden in society, in my opinion. I mean, people that were basically selling their bodies to survive. I mean, I can't even imagine what happened, for somebody to have to get to that point, what their life must be like. And then on top of it, you got this serial killer targeting you because he thinks you're an easy mark.
You mean prostitution is
Prostitutes.
the most empowering, wonderful form of work? That way I say.
I'm sure there are people that do find it empowering, but I
question those people's sanity. So what was his MO? I mean, how did he do this? Where did he put the bodies? How did he get away? I mean, we'll get into kind of how he got away with it a little bit later, but how did he, if he had singled out someone as a victim, what did he do? How did he kill them?
He of course brought them back to the ranch house. There was always a game involved that usually involved handcuffs, the clown suit, wrestling, dancing. He would ply them with alcohol. Sometimes drugs were involved, but usually it was alcohol. And then his two favorite ways of killing were strangling was number one. Strangling with a, not hand-to-hand strangling, but with a string or a cord or something.
Right. That was like his trick. Like, let me show you this trick. Let me put this rope around your neck and show you this trick.
Exactly.
It's like really the stuff of nightmares. And
he did stab a few too. I'm not sure why, but occasionally he would stab them as well.
His construction company had two young men who were employees of his live in his home, David Cram and Michael Rossi. They both testified against him at his trial. They both lived in his home, worked for him, dug ditches around the crawl space where most of the victims' bodies were put, and yet they were allowed to live. Why?
I believe it was Clem that was the first one that Gacy tried to assault. Like they were playing the handcuff game, and I believe Clem was able to get the handcuffs off and get them on Gacy. And Gacy was so impressed with that he didn't kill him that time. And every time he would try to accost Clem would literally beat the shit out of him. I mean, literally put him on the ground, kick him. And finally, Clem just said, "You're no fun," and moved out, which, I'm just like, whatever. I'm not so sure about the other. I believe it was just at that point, he didn't want to, kill who was living with him and bring in all that drama to his house. But I think with Clem, it was just that in a way he might have been afraid of Clem because Clem did his place several times.
And we'll never know because David Cram committed suicide, sadly, in
Well,
2001. So,
and Cram, like I said, there had to be something in Cram's soul that would make him stay in that place. Even if, okay, you're digging trenches under this guy's house, in this, around this guy's house. He's dressing up as a clown. He's handcuffing you. He's trying to force himself on. That's not a good time. I don't understand why anybody would want to stay in there. So I would just imagine there had to be something in their minds or their souls that was just off, you
mhm.
know. Maybe they felt they had no.
So, and how did Gacy finally get caught?
Um, I'll have to refresh my memory on that. I can't. I know that it was a series of circumstances, but
It had to do with his last victim,
yeah,
Pete, who worked at a drugstore, and he
right,
went to, and his mother said,
right.
"I'm going to go talk to this guy about a job."
Job and the mother,
Uh-huh.
and he disappeared. I'm so sorry. I knew it was
Right.
something about
No,
the
no, it's
drugstore.
okay. If you can't, there's 33 victims. Um, you know, and
I
much is
had one of
not
his.
known about a lot of them. I mean, you know, I hate to leave their names out of this broadcast, but it would be just me listing a long list of names with not a lot of information. There's not a lot of information
Like I said,
about his
we
victims
know 10
except
names.
the
We only know.
first and the right, the first and the last one. It's really dissettling,
Well, there was 2
unsettling.
that was very similar, the last one, and then, there was one that was early on. It was a young Yugoslavian immigrant that was just trying to get his money that he was
Bukovic.
owed from work,
Hmm.
and ended up, to me, that was the most tragic thing because his father, knew where he had gone to see Gacy. He just ended up disappearing, and his father, was trying to find him and couldn't, and that to me was sad. But it was the very same thing. This young man worked in a drugstore. Gacy had offered him some extra money. He went over to meet with Gacy about it. Ended up being a victim, and the mother just stayed on top of it. And finally, it was investigated, and then of course they find. Well, it took them several weeks because you had the Great Chicago Blizzard of '79 that interrupted the investigation, but they eventually found 30 some odd bodies or remains of bodies in under the crawl space of the house. It
You
wasn't like Dahmer where he wasn't eating, he wasn't a cannibal that we know of. It was just he liked to bury the bodies. He had a couple people in his garage that he had fully embalmed. So it was just a lot of different weirdness in that house.
So when the police started tracking him because of Peace's mother, really two things. One, the coworker who worked with Peace had borrowed his jacket a bunch of times
Mhm.
that night because it was cold, and eventually gave it back to him. But she had developed some film, and she threw away the receipt, and she thought to herself, "I need to keep that receipt," and she
Mhm.
put it in the pocket of his jacket.
Mhm.
That film receipt was found in Gacy's home, so it became harder for Gacy to deny that he did it. But there's a time period, very interesting time period before he was indicted, where the police are following him around, surveilling him, and hanging out with Gacy
Mhm.
until Gacy eventually um, invites them into his home. How did that go wrong for Gacy?
He just ran out of luck, I think. He was so used to being able to finesse people. He was quite a smooth talker. I mean, he was a politician. Let's put it down though. He was a politician. And his luck ran out. He really believed that these cops were on his side and they were his friends, but they were just playing good cop, bad cop. And then of course, the odors in the house,
Yeah,
eventually
that's what I was getting. I was trying
the
to figure
odors
out.
in the house
Yeah,
and
right,
especially the garage, you had the smell of embalming fluid. That's not something an
right.
aroma you're used to in a suburban
The police
neighborhood.
officer invites him over to the house. He goes to the bathroom, and there's the smell of death wafting out.
Mm,
And that sniff of death became enough of a probable cause to indict him. To get a search warrant on the home. And once he was caught with all these in his home, he started confessing. Now he went back on those confessions. Um, so what? So at trial, so when you're caught with all these bodies, you've gone through, you've sort of shown, like you painted if you're Gacy, you painted stick figures very insensitively where these bodies are, what position, and he had incredible memory of all of his victims and where they were and what direction, and that's a theme for Gacy, the kind of like this attention to detail. His lawyers argued, I believe, the only defense that they could, which was an insanity defense, that he had been so abused as a child that he was insane and didn't know what he was doing, and they presented experts to that. Now, the jury didn't buy that in 1980 when his trial happened, but do you think that they would have an easier time now with this kind of with the public more educated about abuse, more sympathetic to childhood abuse, just more sympathetic towards killers and criminals in general?
I don't think the outcome of the verdict would have been any different, but I think if some the Innocence Project or somebody else took up the banner of Gacy, I believe he could have eventually been released from prison just because of trial by public PR, you know.
Well, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court,
Mhm.
their appeal,
Yeah.
and Thurgood Marshall agreed with Gacy's defense. He was the
Mhm.
dissenting opinion. I
Mhm.
was like, wow, you can get smart people to buy a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, and I believe it would have been like, the Central Park 5 or the, Memphis 3 or, I believe
Any
that
of
he would
the
have
other
eventually
killers,
walked out.
Darlie Routier, any of the other killers. Yeah, although Darlie Routier is still on death row,
Yeah.
but he has her supporters. But yeah, so at the end, he in prison. What was his time in prison like on death row?
I mean, he wasn't as star-studded as he was during his first stint in prison, but he didn't have a whole lot of issues that I can recall while he was in prison. Um he was kept in solitary for a while and then in gin pop for a while, but usually people that are that high profile are kept separate anyway. But look what happened to Dahmer. The inmates tend to fear you more than anything, and they just don't want to be around you. So it wasn't he wasn't as stellar an inmate as he was his first time. At least it wasn't popularized like that. But right up until the point he died, he was executed. He didn't have a hard time in prison either time. I'll put it that way.
They seem to really thrive, these psychopaths in prison. You said he was like the altar, I don't know, some kind of assistant to the priest in prison. Did
Yeah,
you hear that interview with him? What was it? Do you remember exactly what it was? I can't.
he was some kind of you know
Right.
assistant to the chaplain.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's
I
what it was.
don't
Yeah.
can't imagine why you would have somebody like that as the assistant to the chaplain, but
Well, it's not a great group to choose from.
no,
The
it's
people
really
want to
not.
do that, I would think, on
It's
death
really
row.
not.
But is there anything? I mean, is there anything to? So one of the things that his lawyers argued against getting in the sentencing phase of his trial, was that we should not give Gacy the death penalty because his brain and his psyche needs to be studied. Do you think that was a strong argument? And do you think they had a point?
No. I we've been studying the criminally insane for as long as there's been crime, and I don't see how we're any closer to curing crime than we were then. So, I mean, as I said, Gacy was highly intelligent. Gacy was a highly motivated person. He was a success wherever he was and whatever he did. He made it a success. But we've got lots of people that are that way that don't kill 38, don't kill 33 people. So I think someone like Gacy that is so manipulative and can blend in society so well, they're more dangerous than they are beneficial. And I think it's best that he is no longer among us.
Yeah, I really encourage my audience to not only go and subscribe to your channel, but to go and watch the Gacy interviews, especially the last interviews he did before death,
Hmm.
and to see. I might do something actually with them because there's so much like all the rest of the interviews of the people you just mentioned: Davian Eccles, Amanda Knox,
Hmm.
Tunnel Vision Investigation, Trial by Media. Um, um, I'm an innocent victim here too. All the same kind of stories that
Every
I would.
single person,
Right, right,
every single person in your that's in the chat right now that's watching us, you, me, everybody, we're all victims of something. We've always all been victims of something or some circumstance in our life, but none of us have gone out and committed a crime or killed somebody.
right. And,
So why are they special? Because they didn't handle it well? Come on.
and they also bring up his highly organized. One of the interviews I saw, they brought up his extreme organization, and he said, even in prison, he like showed his notebook, and he said, even in prison, I'm keeping records of everything I do and everything the guards do, and they describe him as a highly organized killer. Uh, um, but yet he used marijuana, which I find very interesting, which just seems to be, an opposite kind of drug for, to me, that said control freak. Why do you think he used marijuana, or what do you think it gave him?
Probably a sense of letting go in a way. I would say from the time he was a kid, trying to please his father so much, and then just trying to be a success in everything that he did. He was probably just a highly stressed individual, and I think that the marijuana gave him a sense of being able to let go in whatever way he could let go without worrying about things.
That's
You know,
interesting. Also, it was the 70s, and if
yeah,
you want to
well,
hang
yeah,
out with young people, you have to have and bring them in and
well.
make them vulnerable.
In
You have to
in
have marijuana,
Iowa, he
right?
had a club in the basement of their Waterloo, Iowa home that was kind of a game room, TV room, arcade kind of place that he invited his teenage employees home to, girls and boys. I mean, they would just have parties there, and he would give them alcohol, probably marijuana, and they would just hang out. And so in a way, maybe Gacy never aged past being a preteen or a teenager himself.
Hmm.
But, so like you said, yeah, but since his choice of victims were very young men, marijuana would be an important key to that, I'm sure.
So let's circle back to his one. I think I read 1.5 million dollar estate he left. How did that come to be? How do you get so rich on death row?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the specifics of what he did after death row, but I'm sure his assets, before he went to, I mean, his contracting company was a legitimate contracting company, even with all the shenanigans going on around it. I mean, he did legitimate work. So I'm sure a lot of it he probably hid in the names of his sisters or who else to protect that. And then of course, I'm sure he got hit or his family got paid, for interviews, for whatever he wrote down, for whatever after prison. He was very successful in business. I mean, he had it, the divorce kind of cleaned him out in Iowa, but even before Iowa, he had was doing very quite well for himself in both instances. So
But he was also making a lot of money painting, right? With his
yeah.
painting, selling his paintings on death
Hmm.
row
Hmm.
before his death. And for people asking about Son of Sam laws, the ACLU appealed those successfully. So we don't have Son of Sam laws anymore in America, thanks to the ACLU. Any murderer, my understanding is any murderer can profit as much as they want off of their crime. And he seemed to really make a lot of money. I mean, my understanding is those paintings are still worth a lot of money. Is that true?
Well, yeah, they are. It's just like Charles Manson's music. I see recordings of Charles Manson's music going for thousands of dollars. I'm just like, why? Why do we care? Why do we
Oh, have
care
you
about that?
heard it too?
Oh, it's terrible.
You can feed the world with my garbage dump.
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
like so weird and like nothing you'd want to listen to, or I would want to listen to. But okay, um, so why do you think I don't know. I saw like a short before I talked to you on YouTube, and it was like, "Here's Gacy's clown suit. Isn't it amazing?" Like it's like some seventh wonder of the world. Like, let's just stand in awe of it, and just like, why is he it's almost like they made this total loser. I mean, you watch these interviews where he's lying badly. He's got these piercing eyes, like these piercing dead eyes. I mean, I just consider him just, that's why I called this episode The Biggest Loser. I really consider him just such a loser, despite his ability to make money and gain power. Just such a loser in
Mm-hmm.
life. Why is he so revered? Had he not been a clown, is it the amount of victims? Is it the clownhood? Is it all of that? Some of that?
Well,
Something else?
I think the amount of victims, I mean, to date, except for like, Jim Jones or, some of the people that have caused the crash of airplanes, I think he has probably killed the most, almost at least in the top 5 of serial killers around. So just the amount of victims and how he was able to get away with it for so long and how they were kind of in plain sight the whole time. He was able to get away with so much. One, and the clown. If he hadn't have been Pogo and Patches the clown, I don't think we would know as much about Gacy as we do today.
I mean, in some ways, he's really. What do you think of this? I mean, is this too weird a thought? I mean, in some ways, he's really branding himself and his image for immortality when he's doing those paintings of himself as
Yeah.
a clown and selling them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he wanted to leave a legacy of some sort. Absolutely. It's just like, I guess we'll all have our 15 minutes of fame. I guess he wanted his in spades. But yeah, I mean, if someone's willing to pay you $1,000 for something you scribbled on a piece of paper, I mean, you'd probably be stupid not to take them up on that. But
I saw they're like, your paintings have gotten much better. I'm like, what is this? And then he compared himself to of course, the ultimate psychopath, compared himself to Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
He's like, not because he was queer or anything. I mean, he's just so off-putting and creepy. I just can't believe nobody picked up on, like, after the victims' bodies were found, everybody seemed to not know anything and be surprised. And that seems to be a theme over and over again. And we don't ever seem to hear about the people who really,
I don't even like,
him
being referred to as gay. I'm okay. Maybe he was. I'm gay. So I don't like.
Right.
He was a pedophile. Let's just put it out there. He was a pedophile. His preference was for boys that had not yet grown up.
Mm-hmm.
And so to call him gay, it just, he's a pedo.
Well, I don't think any organization would want to claim him. LGBT organization would want to claim
the premium pack, as I call it.
And he always claimed he was bisexual in his time. Does anybody have any questions? I think we're sort of getting near the end of this before we wrap up. We've been going 42 minutes. Yeah, I just think it's like I think all the stuff right before, he really did seem, in my view, afraid of death at the end there. He told his sister he wasn't, but he was fighting with the help of anti-death penalty organizations to overturn his death sentence up until the very last second.
I mean, you got to he was raised Catholic. He was still, I suppose if he was a faith at all, he was still practicing that faith. I mean, he was the chaplain's assistant. So, Catholicism especially puts the fear, he knew everything he did was wrong, which leads me to believe he was not insane. He was perfectly lucid, and he knew that hell probably awaited him. So I'm sure he had every right to be scared. And yeah, he did, fight it right up until the end. And then when he got there, his last meal, bucket of KFC original recipe, 10 fried shrimp, Diet Coke, and French fries. That's what he wanted.
Why a Diet Coke if you're going to be executed? That's what I want to know. Like, I guess how to taste.
I enjoy the taste of Diet Coke. I mean, some of us are weird and just like the taste.
So strange. It's like, okay. Does anybody have any questions? I think we're gonna. Where can people find you, Tracy?
You can find me over on my YouTube channel at Keto and Crime. Crime is spelled with a K. If you like dark history and true crime, I'm there. I'm about to start a series finishing up a series on the Catholic Church, and I do cults as well, part of dark history. Not calling the Catholic Church a cult, but just the history of the Catholic Church because it's so interesting to me. And I'm also starting a series on the big hitters among the Third Reich. So everybody that was way up in the Third Reich is going to get a video on them. So if you like really dark history, you'll like my channel.
Wait, before you go, I just forgot something. So this is going to be the most awkward ending to a YouTube live video ever. But why? I just want to ask before you go, there's all these conspiracy theories that he had help, that he was part of a ring, that he was protected by the Democratic Party. I mean, these conspiracy theories go all sorts of different ways. Do you think any of them have any value or any sense in any place in reality?
Okay, I'm gonna have to answer this in two parts. Okay. Number one, do I believe that in our government, no matter the party, there are creepers and pedos and criminals of all shapes and sizes that when they profit from something, they protect it? Yes. So I can't say that there were people in the Democratic Party that knew about it and were protecting him. Possibly, absolutely, possibly that could have been happening. But do I believe there was a wide-reaching Democratic conspiracy in the state of Illinois to protect him? I'm not going to go that far. How many people were protecting Epstein? How many people were protecting Maxwell and Epstein?
A lot, or just that guy who just got the crypto guy who just got busted, who's the second biggest donor to the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I mean,
you protect where your money comes from.
And Jim Jones was also very connected.
He was very connected with. Yeah. He wasn't even a real believer. I've been a 4-parter on the People's Temple, and he wasn't even really a Christian. He was just a socialist. He believed in Marxism. He was, even though he did a lot for the African American community, he was kind of racist. If you look at the makeup of his church, the black people were still relegated. The blacks and Hispanics were still relegated to the bottom of the totem pole in his church. He was very much a Stalinist, a Marxist, but he hid behind this veil of Christianity. And he was very well connected with the San Francisco Democratic Party, yes. But because he put forth this whole thing of being this whole thing for social justice, and social justice is important, and is important in a lot of ways, but but a lot of evil can hide behind that.
Right. I mean, there are limits. I mean,
there are limits.
We're trying to create heaven on earth and a utopia, make America a utopia, becomes problematic. All right, Tracy, this was a real pleasure. I encourage everyone to go subscribe to your channel for some really, what I find very engaging and fascinating content. Thank you so much for doing this.
I do want to say one thing. I'm thinking of pulling my Amanda Knox video and redoing it. So if you happen to stumble upon my Amanda Knox video, I have thoroughly changed my mind on that case. Okay. I believed in her innocence at one time. I do not believe in it anymore.
We all did.
Yeah.
We all did. Okay. Thanks so much, Tracy.
Thank you.
Have a great week.